Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Awesome. It's great to be here. Thank you for coming. Thank you for making it to the Javits Center this week. I'm especially happy to be here because it gives me the chance to tell you all about the amazing work that the Just Capital team has been doing over the last year and months. And I don't know how many of the Just teams in the audience, but Laura, Shannon, Ian, Lindsay, Sandy, Marguerite, I think you're in here somewhere. If you have any questions about anything I'm about to say, grab a Just Capital team member. Don't ask me. For those of you that don't know Just, we're a nonprofit based here in New York, about 50 people strong. We're almost 10 years old. We really are set up to try and incentivize companies to do more on major societal challenges. And we don't define what those issues are. The trick to understanding Just Capital is that we turn to the American people. So we do a huge amount of public opinion research to ask folks all around the country on a fully representative basis, what makes a company just? What issues do you care about? And when you do that, you get a very strong sense of where people are at on critical issues, including climate change and climate commitments, and how they think about it, what kind of language they use, what it means to them and their families and their everyday lives. So I think we've got a great way to frame a lot of the challenges that we're faced with as society today. We're all capitalists. We believe in business as a force for good and markets as a way to really generate change at scale. You can think of what we do in sort of three buckets. We, as I said, do a huge amount of polling, public opinion research, get all the issues. We then gather data to measure, track, and rank big publicly traded companies on all the issues that the public have told us they care about. We produce rankings, which you probably know us for, but we also do a lot of work with the companies. And we do all that whole process is done with a huge amount of transparency, so the companies really feel they can see everything that's happening, and that's helped us build trust with the companies. It's helped us build credibility. We now have, I think this year, set a new record for corporate engagement for us. So maybe of our universe, almost 400 companies were part of that engagement process. That number has gone up tremendously over the last few years. And then the last thing we do is we take all that data and the rankings and we do things that drive change. We build investment products. We, as I said, work with the companies in specific areas of programs. We build indexes that make the business case and the investor case for action. And we're also very focused on shifting the narrative. And the narrative of the last few years on climate and on many other social issues has become very, very polarized. I was reflecting on the fact that the last time I was at the Javits Center was not a year ago, it was actually about 6 months ago, and I was on stage with Vivek Ramaswamy at the YPO event. We were sort of debating. They wanted like opposing points of view on issues. And all I'll say is that he's really, I think, changed his position on climate based on the debate that I saw a month ago. But the debate is important, having the debate, having a proper discussion about what's at stake and what to do about it. That we do need to do. And you can only do that if you've got real data and you're anchored, I think, not around ideology perhaps as much as science. I'm going to talk a little bit about that when you see what companies are doing. So I'm just going to walk through a few slides that showcase our research and the data, some of the polling data, some of the company commitments. You'll see how different kinds of commitments by companies, and these are all US publicly traded companies, how those commitments vary by industry, by type. And then when I'm done with the slides, about 10 minutes from now, I'm going to welcome on stage representatives of 3 companies that are really leaders in the space. And I'll get to that in a few minutes. We'll have a real conversation about what's actually going on inside companies like Workday, Ecolab, and Train Technologies. These are leading companies. How do they get to do what they do? Why? What's motivating them? What challenges are they facing? So that'll be a good discussion. But let's start with the polling. Here you can see percentages of the public on a representative basis, as I said, who agree that CEOs of large companies have a role to play in addressing a variety of issues. And then you see climate change. I don't have a pointer. I hope you can see that. 4th down, 69%. I can tell you that if you double-clicked on that by political ideology, those on the more liberal end of the spectrum, that's around 90%. Conservatives, closer to mid-40%, just FYI. But it places it in context. The fact is that most people do believe CEOs in big companies have a huge role to play in tackling climate change and lots of other social issues as well. People don't think that companies should just pursue business as usual. They want them involved. They certainly want them involved as employees and workers and as investors in some cases. But generally, they feel business should play a very prominent role in driving societal change. And you can see some of the other issues that we've identified here. The framing is very important. If you frame climate change in terms of jobs, health, strong communities, you get a very different answer than if you frame it as in terms of ESG or sustainability or the SDGs. Because most people in Main Street America have no idea what you're talking about when you say those things. In fact, if anything, it creates suspicion. I think what we've learned at Just to do, I think one of the things we do very well is kind of try and meet people where they are on some of these issues and really try to understand how they connect the dots on these, what we know, those of you who are in the climate world know are very interconnected issues, interconnected in terms of justice and climate, income inequality and climate, jobs and climate. So this is how we do what we do. These 5 stakeholders are the 5 categories of issues that we get from our public opinion research. Those don't change. They've been that way for many, many years. And then where you see those issues, you see environment at the bottom there, and then the 4 issues, which are minimizes pollution to safeguard human health, develops and supports sustainable products, combats global climate change, and uses natural resources efficiently. That's sort of those are the issues that the public, they may not use exactly those words, but when you speak to thousands and thousands of people, those are the categories of issues that emerge and are weighted to be most important. We then, meaning Just Capital, we then pick, okay, how are we going to measure these things? And so you see for climate change there, we have Scope 1, Scope 2, greenhouse gas emissions. We're measuring climate commitments. And so this just gives you a snapshot of like how we work. So those are the metrics. Each of those things we measure will have different metrics. We then go gather data that comes from different sources. In this case, we're talking about climate commitments. Those commitments obviously come from the companies. And we measure those commitments in raw data points in 4 categories. General emission reduction commitments, net zero by 2050, and then 2 science-based targets, 2-degree scenario and a 1.5-degree scenario, the most stringent, obviously. So that's sort of how we measure, and that the data you're going to see is going to flow from that process. Here's a breakdown of climate commitments over the last 3 years that we've been measuring. So the number on the y-axis, those are the number of companies. And then you've got the 4 categories across the x-axis, from emission reduction all the way up to the most stringent level, the 1.5-degree science-based targets. A couple of interesting things to point out. Emission reduction commitments have kind of flatlined. You know, if you were to, and the number there is interesting, so don't forget, our universe is 1,000, Russell 1000. So that means you've probably got about half companies in the Russell 1000 that have made no emission reduction commitment whatsoever. The net zero commitments over the last 3 years have grown tremendously. And even over the last 12 months, we've seen a huge growth there, which is interesting when you consider the political pushback the companies have been taking and the sort of, you know, the controversy that's surrounding American business leadership on all sorts of social issues, including climate change. So you still see that, and I think there are other anecdotal points that I would say also suggest to me companies are not pulling back in terms of the actions that they're taking. Our record levels of corporate engagement would support that too. We'll get on to what they are pulling back from, which is how they talk about it publicly, how they message it. We haven't seen much change in terms of the numbers around the 2-degree science-based targets, those companies committed to that. But we have seen growth in the number of companies using verified 1.5-degree science-based targets. And all 3 of the companies that are about to come on stage are in that last category. So we're going to find out why they have chosen that as their path forward. The other thing that's interesting here is that every industry is represented in that net zero by 2050 bucket. So you would think, I thought most of these commitments would be in emissions intensive industries, and we're not seeing that. So the question is why? You know, why would a company that is in the, I don't know, personal products industry care so much about net zero by 2050? What's motivating them? We'll come back to that in a second. So you see here, as I said, a little over half disclose some kind of climate target year with those emissions reductions. Most commonly, it's in the 10 to 20 year sort of target year reduction range. But you see some more immediate, less than 10 years, and then you see another almost 30% going out beyond 20 years. 2018 is the average baseline year, 2034 is the average target year. Here you see those industries that I mentioned, some of them, their sort of disclosure on what they're doing. You know, one of the things that we look at is, okay, well, what are companies actually doing to reduce emissions? So what do these commitments encompass? And here I've just picked out a couple of strategies companies are deploying around carbon sinks. So that's biodiversity, wetlands, forestry, of course. Surprising amount of popular use of carbon sinks in the personal products industry. Who knew? And then CCS, obviously carbon capture and storage, which you would see, again, sort of actually quite popular across different industries, which might be surprising, but most prominently used in chemicals on the far right there. Here you've got the average reduction commitment by industry. So on the far right are the industries where you've got the greatest levels of commitment. And some of those industries you might expect to see there. You know, I'm looking at utilities, for example. The banks are all up there. Internet companies, though, interesting. The far left, you've got industries where the emission reduction commitment is lowest. And again, you might expect in building materials, for example, you might be surprised to see such a low level of emission reduction there. So it's kind of interesting to me that you've got every industry where you are seeing these commitments. We do have data on the range of those commitments within those industries. I think we don't have that data in this presentation, but we can talk about that afterwards. But it's sort of heartening to see that, in fact, this is not just concentrated in a certain sector or a certain industry. The bad news, I suppose, before we start to talk to the companies is we're not actually seeing progress in emissions going down, except for one category, which is the 1.5 degree most stringent category. There you have seen a year-on-year emission reduction. But in the other three areas, you can see the numbers there, they're big. And we just have not seen, we've not seen those reductions actually happen. So, that gives you a sense of the state of play around corporate climate commitments, who's doing what it looks like by different industries, what type of commitments companies are making. And now I want to get into the let's call it the human story, of companies that are in that leading bucket and what they're seeing. Not just what they're seeing inside their own companies, but also what they're seeing across the industry. So I'm going to be joined on stage by Emilio Tenuta. Emilio is the Senior Vice President, Chief Sustainability Officer, Ecolab. Eric Hansen is the Senior Director of Global Environmental Sustainability at Workday. And Scott, too, who's VP of Sustainability at Trane Technologies. Emilio, Eric, Scott, if you could join me on stage. I guess, great, thank you. So I've told them what awesome leaders you are and how your companies are really, blazing a trail on emissions reductions. And what I'd like to try and do, as we said in the green room, is just try and explore that a little bit. What journeys have your companies been on? Why are you doing what you're doing? And then we'll get into some of the nuance around, your sort of individual company's journeys and whatever else you're seeing out there. So maybe Emilio, start with you. Tell us a little bit about the why. Why has Ecolab decided to be a leader in this space?
Well, first of all, thanks for having us and leading this very important topic of during Climate Week. And it's great to be with all of you and with our fellow panelists here. So the why is very interesting for Ecolab, and I think a little bit we might be a brand that you may not know when you think of Workday and Trane Technologies. Ecolab is a global leader in water and hygiene technologies and services. We serve over 44 different industries, and a big part of the solution that we deliver to our 3 million customers that we serve in over 170 countries is the ability for us to deliver very specific business outcomes and performance around their operations, whether it be a hotel, a food and beverage processor, or a mining operation in Chile. So we do that while driving operational efficiency and also reduction of natural resource use like water and climate and carbon. So that to us is very core to our strategy. And so I'm going to rewind to 2018. And for those of you who've actually had your CEO at Climate Week, because it's not a foregone conclusion that CEOs are all attending Climate Week, right? So I had the pleasure of taking our CEO at that time, Doug Baker, who's our CEO and chairman at that time, to Climate Week. And we're at the Westin in the lobby bar talking about climate. And I had garnered an opportunity for him to speak at UNGA, which was a big deal for him. And as we concluded that session and we're at that Westin lobby bar, we talked about how important this was and having a voice in this conversation. So he asked me, he said, what's preventing us from doing a net zero UN business ambition 1.5 degree climate pledge? I said, your commitment is one of the things that we need, because that top down is absolutely necessary. And it's not a foregone conclusion, folks, that you're always going to get that top down on everything you do. And so I think a big part of the why is really, for us, it's core to our business strategy, and we have a leadership commitment that this is not only the right thing to do, but it's also good business for us in terms of driving our business results.
Great. And I suspect senior leadership, CEO leadership, is going to be the case no matter what the issue, no matter what which company. Eric, we were here a year ago on this stage talking about all the things you're doing. Maybe, again, tell us a bit more about the why, but especially over the last 12 months since we sat here, has anything changed? Have you felt like your leadership is getting more challenged, easier? Like what's the journey been like over the last 12 months in particular?
That's a great question. Can you hear me? Do I need that mic too?
I don't know. Can you all hear?
We're good? We're good.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, so first, Martin, thank you for inviting me back. Clearly, something went right in the last 12 months.
It's a totally different audience. Don't worry.
It's a great panel. Yeah, so Workday, so for those of you who don't know Workday, like I'll be real brief. We are a leading provider of enterprise cloud applications for finance and human resources. So we have financial management, spend management, planning, analytics, human resources applications for over 10,000 customers globally across industries, from medium-sized enterprises to over 50% of the Fortune 500 actually run part of their business using Workday. So for us, I mean, we're a part of our customers' supply chain, right? We're part of their footprint. So it makes sense for us if we're going to sell to these customers who are increasingly caring about climate change and their Scope 3 footprint, their supply chain footprint. This is moving, from several years ago where this was sort of like nice to have to table stakes. And I think increasingly, Martin, over the past 12 months or so, we're really seeing that ramp up. And when you put the slide showing the science-based target, companies, what I can share is the latest data that I have from SBTI is that there are 3,000 companies globally that have committed to science-based targets, and another 3,000 on top of that that have had their targets verified. So I know that's not the Russell 1000 necessarily, but what we're seeing is that those customers, and for us, over 10,000 customers, a big chunk of those are now reaching out to us and asking, what are you doing? What have you set? And so for us to come to them and say, we're providing you a carbon neutral cloud. You don't need to worry about your footprint in us. Our data centers, we are matching 100% of the electricity with renewable electricity. We've set a science-based emissions reductions target. Now suddenly that conversation, completely changes, right? They understand that we're a values-led organization that's here to support them on their climate journey as well.
Thank you. Maybe we'll come back next year and go through that and see what's changed in the next 12 months. Scott, Trane Technologies has really put itself out there. You're I think, been at the forefront, not just in this country, but globally. Again, talk a little bit about the why. What is really motivating your company in this moment?
Yeah, I've appreciated these stories too, and thanks for having us. Thank you all for being here. The last thing this city needs, I think, is another panel for us all to go to, but I appreciate you being here. Martin, also thanks for the feedback that Just Capital gives us. That's part of the inputs that I think companies like ours needs to understand where we can improve, so thank you for that. The why for Trane Technologies, for those that don't know the company, we cool and heat the world. Pretty simply, your homes, the building that we're in, we are one of the major providers of comfort for the world. And our leadership team a few years ago heard a startling statistic that we had to grapple with, and the statistic was this: 40% of the world's energy is related to buildings, and related to heating and cooling buildings. 40% of the world's energy is for heating and cooling buildings. A tremendous opportunity or concern. The other piece of that is a lot of that is for heating those buildings, which is still based on a very old model. The old model of we build a fire with fossil fuels and we heat the building just like we did the cave thousands of years ago. And there's new ways to do this. And our leadership team began to grapple with what's our role here. If we believe the science, if we believe that some company has to step forward to make a difference, why not us? And we had to answer all those questions. And then we had to answer the question of what will it take to move the needle, to bend the curve? And that's what we set out doing. And so in 2019, we made a very bold commitment, the first of several, but the bold commitment then was what we call the Gigaton Challenge, to reduce emissions of our products that we sell to customers by 1 billion metric tons by 2030. That's a science-based target. The Gigaton Challenge is sort of a marketing nomenclature, but it's really a metric that we're measuring. We're measuring at every project level we install in the world. So we're measuring it very specifically at the zip code equivalent level. And it's an all-in moment for the company. It has engaged our people around innovations, our leadership team, completely engaged, so much so that many of them are here this week, but more than that, they're spending time with their own teams, trying to understand what their teams and as individuals, what's their role as a leader for a company that wants to actually lead an industry in a different direction.
How do your shareholders feel?
The shareholders love it. We've had, I have this nice graphic that I would have loved to have had here showing this. We've been able to disconnect emissions growth from revenue growth so that the emissions can be reduced and revenue can grow. We've been growing the company tremendously, and shareholder return is excellent. We're also a very big holding by ESG investors who ask all the right questions, very detailed questions around not only about our progress, but also about the calculations and about what's next. Because we won't get there without innovation, and so the story has to be told in lots of ways.
One of the conversations we're having backstage was what is holding some companies back. You're all leaders. You saw the numbers in the presentation I gave. Still many companies silent or holding back for whatever reason, and they may be perfectly valid reasons, but what do you see out there in terms of other companies that maybe are afraid to take action or are being held back by whatever forces, whether it's investor forces or otherwise? What's your message to them, and what are you seeing in terms of the industry? Do you feel like there's a general direction, or are we still in this sort of kind of polarized state? Maybe Emilio.
Yeah. So I would say that there's absolutely that. It's become a polarizing topic. If you talk about ESG today, which is unfortunate, and I think part of the challenge is that when we hear organizations talking about their ESG leadership, they focus on it's the right thing to do, which I think falls flat.
Yeah.
I'll just throw it out there.
I agree.
I think we need to build, and I think you've heard from 2 other companies besides Ecolab, where if it's not aligned with your business strategy and drives what is customer growth and opportunities to really drive innovation and the ability to really demonstrate how this is the right thing to do, but more importantly, it drives results and performance in terms of your business, then I think we're going to continue to have this conversation.
What is that? Is that a mindset?
So
what is that?
Well, I mean, I think it's really it's hardwiring the organization to really understand. Like in the case of Ecolab, it's a little bit more straightforward, directly, where we have, when we set our 2030 impact goals, we have a net zero goal, 1.5. By 2050 and halfway there by 2030. We also have what we call a customer target that says we're going to generate the right technology that will enable you to not only drive that business performance across your operations, but also to reduce costs, because if you reduce energy, use less water, you can save money. And at the same time, reduce your natural resource dependency, which will allow you to achieve your long-term goals. And we know from the data you shared that more organizations are making commitments. But the big thing, and I think the cynicism out there by consumers, is that we're setting bold, ambitious targets, and we don't have a plan to get there, or we're not showing enough action. I think that's another big problem with the woke ESG.
I've seen polling by ourselves and by Edelman and others that investors don't really believe companies' targets on climate or other issues. Are they really walking the talk? Scott, what's your take on the companies that perhaps are more intransigent on this issue?
I mean, I think what we should be doing is looking across every sector of the economy, whatever company you represent, you're in some sector, And I think there is a winning company in every sector who understands that action, to Emilio's point, action means more than ambition in my view. We need to be able to demonstrate what we're doing, what the actions are and what they lead to, what the outcomes are. But there needs to be a company identified in every sector of the economy that stand out. I mean, that's what you're doing at Just Capital. You're trying to identify those companies. We all should be doing that. I personally think about many sectors of the economy, and I'm always looking for who's the company leading the way there, because we need that company in every sector to show the rest of that sector what winning looks like, where you can have the increasing revenues and at the same time you can reduce impact and emissions the right way. And we need leading companies across all the sectors. And if a sector doesn't have one, then we all should be asking why. But I think that's the important thing, which is I'm with a company that we talk about that internally often, and we've watched some of our peers actually step up, and they're doing some of the same things that we're doing. This is what we need to be seeing. This is how the market's supposed to work. If we're going to compete with products, let's also compete with not just ambition, let's compete with action. Let's compete with what we offer that's a new alternatives, and it's a new way of solving something, and that's what we need.
Eric, Workday is providing solutions to other companies to help them do this. Are you seeing, is business good in that area? Are you seeing businesses across different industries increasingly need those kind of solutions?
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing is demand for, as you say, solutions. What we offer, if you look at the different applications that we have, right? We have the financial system of record, your HR system of record, your planning, application for how you do financial forecasting, analytics engine. What we found is that we can build solutions end to end, we have a Workday sustainability solution where customers can actually measure their value chain emissions, engage with their suppliers to meet their science-based target on your supply chain. We have solutions that some of our partners like Deloitte are building on top of the Workday platform to help with our customers' climate goals. They can do financial forecasting, climate scenario analysis using Workday Adaptive Planning to solve for whatever needs that they may have.
So you haven't seen a pullback from business around climate, like needing climate solutions?
No, this is not going away, right? I mean, if anything, so we track RFPs and we track the revenue associated with those RFPs that come through our proposal group. Now, granted, there's other business that's done outside of the proposal team, but it's representative of what we're seeing. And over the past few years, that is more than doubled in terms of the large companies, customers. We're an enterprise, B2B player that are coming to us and saying, you need to be doing this on climate, right? And that's not going away. I only see that accelerating. So I'm not personally seeing that pullback. And if anything, it's the opposite. We had a very large Fortune 500 full platform, customer renewal that, contractually said, look, you're gonna be carbon neutral and you're gonna set a science-based target. That's an unheard of discussion, 5 years ago, but that's happening now, right? So if anything, I think this is only gonna continue accelerating. So the question is, when are we gonna take action? Like, you gotta start now. Start right now. Don't wait 5 years to get a pulse check, to get another temperature check, so to speak. Yeah. Start right now, because it's only accelerating.
Nothing better than a customer calling with very specific questions about how you're going to help them in their journey. Yeah. But nothing better than companies like ours actually calling a supplier to say, we want you to show us low carbon, low emissions options, and let's talk about those. That's what changes the marketplace.
Yeah. Let's switch gears to talk about politics for a second. I mentioned last time I was here, I was talking to Vivek. Scott, do you care who wins the next election? Like which party's in power? Does it matter to you?
I personally care. However,
I mean from a business, from a business climate commitment standpoint. You know,
no matter who's elected, it won't slow anything down. Not our ambition, not our actions, not our strategy. Our people won't let it happen. Our people are very engaged in this. They feel like it's a personal value of their own. We've seen that. We've tested it, actually. And I can tell you that it's not about politics for us. Now, that doesn't mean that things policy-wise can't slow some of our progress down. They can certainly speed it up. I don't know about slowing it down. The IRA is a great example of something that accelerates adoption of new solutions, and we're very happy about that. But even without that, we were doing great things before then, and so we thrived in the last administration, and we'll thrive in the next one.
Yeah, I'm sure if you're doing business anywhere in Europe, Canada, anywhere else around the world, you have to have climate considerations,
Correct.
you know, in your proposals and your work plans. Politics, Emilio, does it affect how Ecolab thinks about its work, its business? No?
No, and I think you hit the nail on the head. We're a global company, just like, you know, Workday and Train, and I think we made the commitment during the last administration for a science-based target. We're going to continue that journey. That's not only the right thing to do, but it's driving our business strategy. I would say that I want to really highlight what Scott said about the transformational policy in the United States with IRA and, you know, the bipartisan infrastructure bill last year. That to me is what it's going to take to keep this thing going. And I think no one can argue, I think on both sides, that this is a good thing, because if we're going to mobilize on the transformation and the actions that we need to have the right incentives in place to drive the technology and the projects that we want, because I really believe that this will enable us to really have the kind of impact that we need to see in places where the business case wasn't as clear. And I think that was the big thing is, you know, it's equalizing things a little bit more so that we can make decisions to take action in more places.
Conscious of time, I just want to hit a few sort of high notes. I think maybe, you know, one of the things that struck me this week has been the diversity of conversation around climate and what issues are sort of coming to the fore. I was saying backstage, I had a conversation on Monday night around music and the role of music in inspiring action on climate. It's very, very interesting. What are you seeing out there that interests you and that is inspiring to you? Eric, maybe start with you on climate justice. We mentioned that backstage, and it was like a few years ago, you know, it would have been a very difficult business conversation. Now it's very much part of the business conversation. Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think it's great that we're having that discussion now, right? It's great that we're on stage and actually talking about this, and people are thinking about this from you know, a corporate sustainability perspective, where once that wasn't part of the conversation. You know, for us, you know, we have to acknowledge that you know, underrepresented communities are often the hardest hit with the effects of climate change. So pollution, climate disasters, we recognize that, right? And so we can apply that lens to a lot of the decisions that we're making, you know, in terms of climate strategy. And I'll give you an example. So on the renewable energy side, right, we have a commitment to match 100% of our global electricity consumption with renewables. And one of the ways that we're sort of thinking about this, we're founding members with the Clean Energy Buyers Association's Beyond the Megawatt program, which is taking a more holistic lens to how we do energy procurement. So it's not just the financials of that, and it's not just a volumetric per megawatt hour procurement strategy, but how do you do that with the lens of resiliency, climate equity, climate justice, other environmental outcomes beyond just carbon. And they've recently just launched principles for purpose-driven energy procurement, which I would encourage you, if you have any energy teams and you're doing, you know, large-scale solar, wind procurement at your companies, take a look at those principles, because they apply that sort of lens around climate justice as a key consideration in addition to everything else that you should be considering around renewable energy procurement.
And I know you're also doing a lot on Scope 3, which has obviously been a big topic of conversation here, certainly around disclosure, you know, in the SEC. you want to just say a few words on the Scope 3 work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important, you know, from a disclosure perspective, what we really want to see is sort of harmonization across the different, whether CSRD, SEC, California now has, you know, passed a bill around disclosure. And so what our aim is really, you know, how do we harmonize all of those? Because to the extent that they're harmonized, we now have the data that we need to go take action. To Scott's point, look, we're all about action. And so we're going to watch for the SEC rule, and when that is issued, you know, we'll react accordingly. But to the extent that everything can be harmonized, I think that's going to enable all of us to take the action that we actually need to solve this climate crisis.
Scott, what are you seeing that's exciting you? What are you most energized about right now?
I mean, it's a bit selfish, but I would say that we've all watched the energy sector begin to transition over the past decade. I would say the transportation sector has been transitioning for the last 5 years. Some of us drive EV cars now, and there's no negative trade-offs. The next big sector that is going to transition is the built environment. And for buildings like this, there's some exciting things happening. 2 we announced just this week. One is we have a partnership with a group called BrainBox, which is an AI-enabled suite of tools that allow buildings like this just to be smarter. We've all talked about smart buildings. There haven't been many, but thank goodness we can now combine some systems and use the power of things like AI to do things automatically. That really is a game changer on efficiency. And the other thing is we're sort of disrupting ourselves. For 100 years, for buildings like this one, we've had a heating system and a cooling system. They work simultaneously all the time, and not in parallel, separately, both consuming energy, both have their own issues, and we've brought to market a system that's a combined system, a new way of doing it, all electric, zero trade-offs. It's 3 times more efficient. The ROI is in less than 2 years, which is under every company in America's time frame for payback. And it's, you know, it's being adopted in Europe more rapidly because they had some regulations forcing it. But it's about to take America by storm, and so it's a disruptor inside of a sector. So all these things related to advancements in technology are really exciting.
Thank you for mentioning AI. It means we've got
that?
AI into the panel.
We did.
No panel is complete
That was
without
the rule.
conversation about AI. Emilio, I want to give you a chance to talk about water in particular.
Well, I mean, if you just framing up the question you asked earlier about, you know, what I'm most excited about,
Yeah.
the fact, and I know the audience has seen this, is that water is at the table finally at Climate Week. Yay! Because water, let's talk about water for just 2 seconds.
Now you got it started.
Yeah, which is, if we're talking about, you know, climate, the climate crisis is a water crisis. And I say that because the way we're going to experience the effects of climate change is through water. Droughts, floods, extreme temperatures, the effects of extreme weather events like hurricanes and so on. So I just want you all to know that this is an opportunity for us to really lean in on the fact that, you know, if we are going to solve the climate crisis, that we need to really think about how water, energy, and greenhouse gas emissions are all linked. And I'll just make one shout out, because I thought, Martin, you would appreciate this. On Tuesday, Ecolab released a inaugural, we call it the Watermark study, and it was basically what's the state of water stewardship with consumers, one of the stakeholders that you had. And 2 really key points just to bring up. One is that, and by the way, this is tens of thousands of consumers that we surveyed, and we found out amazingly that water and the water access, going back to what Eric talked about from a climate and environmental justice perspective, water access was paramount to consumers, even above climate issues and pollution. So think about that. It's more immediate. It's what we're going to talk about when we think about water quality challenges in the communities that we're living in. So the second key point is that businesses and government are responsible to driving the actions we need to manage water better as a steward. which is all about taking care of something that we don't own. It's a shared resource. So I thought I'd share that. I owe Scott $20 because he said, there's no way we're going to get through this panel without mentioning water.
Well, I brought it up, so I feel.
Thank you.
Okay, nailed it. Thank you, gentlemen. Please join me in giving Emilio, Eric, and Scott a big round of applause. Thank you so much.